When we're trying to get closer to the truth, we know how much it helps to learn from other people. We also want them to learn from us. The problem is that lots of the time, people end up talking past each other. If you and I have a very different background or totally different worldview, the problem can be 10 times worse. How do we communicate so we can best learn from other people and so they can best learn from us? Some of the best research around this communication comes from pointy issues like vaccine hesitancy. Humanity has a vaccine for measles, but before we did, there were millions of cases every year. In 1958, in the USA alone, there were 750,000 cases of measles and over 500 deaths, mostly of kids under 5. Fortunately now, most of the parents worldwide get their children vaccinated. This has been a great success. For example, in the US in 2004, not a single child died of measles. It's one of medicine's triumphs. The problem is, some parents don't get their children vaccinated. For example, one Italian family declined the measles vaccination despite knowing their son had leukemia. He caught measles at age 6 and tragically died as a result. Lots of people want to stop this kind of tragic death from happening. Some people think we should pressure or coerce parents into vaccinating their children. For example, this paper suggests that parents should be liable for the choices that they make. If harm is done by avoiding vaccinations for their children, they should be liable in the same way drink drivers are liable for the damage they cause. Others instead try to change minds with reasons and arguments. If someone disagrees with you, then it feels like you should just need a better argument or find a bigger hole in their argument. But put the shoe on the other foot. As people try to poke holes in your argument, it's easy to find it all pretty frustrating. You can see from this interview how reasons and arguments can just fan the flames.
Vaccines leading to autism, that's totally been debunked.
Wait a minute, who debunked it?
We have not seen any kind of scientific connection from the CDC, the World Health Organization, the National Academy of Sciences.
Those organizations are captive agencies, Lindsay.
And so you think they're all in cahoots?
Yeah, they're all captive.
And you can see the typical way people try to convince others at the end of the interview.
We should note that during our conversation, Kennedy made false claims about the COVID-19 vaccines. Data shows that the COVID-19 vaccines prevented millions of hospitalizations and deaths from the disease.
It's how big swathes of society works. We hope that rules and attitudes evolve as better evidence comes in. Science also evolves as we gather new evidence. I try my best to learn from new evidence, and if you're doing this course, you probably do the same thing. Still, sometimes we can hear new evidence and get a bit defensive. If it's a tough or personal topic, we can want to argue back or just switch off. I'm sure we can all remember being lectured by someone about something and just wanting to walk away. So it's important to remember that our brains are naturally a bit resistant to hearing arguments that don't support our current views. We've got an inherent skepticism. As a tribal species, we're also more open to ideas that come from people more like us. That means it's easy to dismiss arguments from people we don't yet trust. If we don't feel they understand us, then we don't try to understand them. With different ideas, it can feel like people are speaking different languages. When this happens, sometimes people just start speaking louder or in a more condescending tone and hoping that the meaning gets through.
Do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth?
Other times, they just stop listening because they realize the other person just can't understand them. This shows that before we can persuade someone, we need to learn how to speak their language. We need to show them that we can understand. So when it comes to communicating about ideas, a metaphor is that we want to be able to pass the Ideological Turing Test. Let me explain what that is. In the normal Turing test, Alan Turing said we would know when computers are intelligent when we could no longer tell whether text was coming from a computer or a human. Brian Kaplan translated this metaphor into communicating about ideas. He argued that if we want to know the truth about a debate, we should be able to explain both sides correctly, in a way each side would agree with. He cites John Stuart Mill, who says, "He who knows only his own side of the case knows little of that." The Ideological Turing Test is a test of whether you've really understood someone's perspective. The ability to pass ideological Turing tests, to state opposing views as clearly and persuasively as their proponents, is a genuine symptom of objectivity and wisdom. So if we're trying to persuade those Italian parents to get their kids vaccinated, we might first need to listen to their side and then explain what we understand to be their perspective. We might need to acknowledge what they see as the risks. Now, we don't need to agree with everything they say, but we should be able to see things from their side and put things in their words. If we show we understand their values, we can approach the discussion from a place of mutual respect. This is important even when the stakes are really high. For example, Chris Voss is a world-class hostage negotiator with the FBI. When a 28-year-old journalist was taken by masked gunmen in Iraq, Chris was the one who negotiated her freedom. He obviously didn't agree with everything the gunman told him, but in his book, Never Split the Difference, he talks about how empathy was the secret to his success. He could summarize the gunman's perspective in a way that they would agree with. So they would say, yes, that's right. In doing so, he'd build enough trust that he'd be able to get what he wanted. If he came out ridiculing their position, he couldn't develop the relationship he needed in order to work with the gunman. This means if you disagree with someone, try to rein in the urge to better explain your point of view. If you want to persuade someone or get to the truth, your first job is to ask questions, to listen, and to get to a point you can explain their point of view so well that they would agree with you. Now, one word of warning, if you explain their side with a sprinkling of contempt or judgment, then they'll be able to pick up on it. It won't feel like you understand their side, but that you're mocking it. To pass the Ideological Turing Test, you need to not just listen, but try to listen and reflect back what you hear non-judgmentally. There's an important side effect of this process, one that helps us get closer to the truth ourselves. By listening non-judgmentally and doing it so well we can explain the other person's perspective accurately, we might learn something important ourselves. By passing the Ideological Turing Test with other people, we might actually start to see some of the merits of their ideology.
Your rebuttal.
We have no response. That was perfect.
It helps us better figure out what the truth might actually be. As Kaplan says, if someone can correctly explain a position but continues to disagree with it, that position is less likely to be correct. And if the ability to correctly explain a position leads almost automatically to agreement with it, that position is more likely to be correct. So this test helps us get closer to the truth ourselves. We're often overconfident in our understanding until we try to put it into words. For example, 2 psychologists from Yale asked people if they understood simple everyday objects. Do you know how a zipper works? How about a piano key? What about a toilet? People were pretty confident they could explain all these things. That is, until you actually asked them to explain how stuff worked. Which is crazy, because we all know how a zipper works. You pull the thing and it zips, done, boom, next. This is called the illusion of explanatory depth. We think we can explain how something works, but we crumble when we actually have to do it. Just having people try to explain their views made them much less certain about what they knew. They stopped being overconfident. The same thing happens in political ideas too. Joseph Vitriol and his team asked people to explain policies people were voting on. Stuff like raising the retirement age or a cap and trade system for carbon emissions. People were confident in how much they understood these things until you asked them to explain them.
Do you think Americans should ban fracking?
No.
You don't?
No.
People that are involved in fracking, what are they doing?
I don't know.
For most people, their confidence dropped as soon as you asked them to explain the idea step by step. Still, practice makes perfect. Getting people to explain how things work to themselves or to someone else was a really good learning strategy. This was particularly true when you could get feedback. A meta-analysis of 64 studies found self-explanation prompts are a potentially powerful intervention. When we realize we don't know how something works, we're motivated to go find out. How does zipper work? Hey, I said cut. Overall, when we try to pass the Ideological Turing Test, we might get a better feeling for whether we truly understand someone else's ideas, and they might also feel more likely to want to understand yours. So often we might think that we know what they're saying, but that confidence falls apart as soon as we try to put it into words. That's okay, and it's the first part of getting more accurate. Knowing what we don't know is an important step in getting closer to the truth. As psychology professor Tanya Israel says, a little more listening to understand, a little less trying to convince, and a lot more intellectual humility would do everyone a world of good. People have been using strategies like these to successfully tackle all sorts of important social problems, like vaccine hesitancy. Adam Grant's a professor of psychology and a best-selling author. As he talks about in his New York Times article, there are controlled trials of this type of communication. For one group, you try to persuade people, and in the other, you first start by making the other person feel heard. The latter approach has helped people improve their diets, exercise more, overcome eating disorders, reduce prejudice, and settle disputes. The same kind of approach was used to help ambivalent mothers to consider vaccinating their children. Nurses would listen patiently, show that they understood the mother's perspective and what they cared about, and only then help them explore whether vaccination was aligned with those values. These 20-minute conversations increased willingness to get vaccinated from 72% up to 87%. When we first seek to understand and then be understood, we can help people better see our perspective and we might learn something useful along the way. Like how you learned from me how zippers worked, which is just a bonus along with the rest of this course, a little engineering bonus from me to you.